Ladies and gentlemen, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. Welcome, welcome everyone. My name is Vivian. This is Building on the Success, Effective Strategies for Microtransit and Micromobility. Welcome everybody in. Again, my name is Vivian Martitas. I appreciate everyone joining us. I know it's been a long day of networking, a long day of talking, a long day of exciting panels, but we've got another great one for you today. So I want to welcome my panelists here. We'll do a brief introduction. Again, my name's Vivian. I've been with CoMotion for some time, but spent the last, 7, 8 years in micromobility and transportation and government. So spent a little bit of time working on some great transportation projects. So glad to be here with this esteemed group. And I'll hand it off to Alex for a brief introduction.
Great. Thanks for joining. Post-lunch, pre-happy hour. Vivian, thanks for having us. I'm Alex Esposito. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO at Circuit. We're an on-demand shared electric shuttle service. We focus on short trips, and we operate in about 40 different cities around the U.S., mainly here in Southern California and South Florida, with some other operations in New York, D.C., Boston, Seattle, Bellevue area as well.
Hey all, I'm Josh Johnson. I lead public policy for the West region of Lyft Urban Solutions, the recently rebranded bike and scooter side of the business for Lyft. So that includes the bike town system in Portland, Bay Wheels in the Bay Area, our Denver bike and scooter operations. Really excited to be here talking about how micromobility really fits in the urban fabric of transportation.
Yeah. Hey there, I'm Ryan Russo. I'm Executive Director of NACTO. NACTO is the National Association. Oh, Greg!
Got some fans
NACTO
in the
member,
crowd.
you want to come up and do the panel, Greg?
Wow.
I'm representing you. Okay, so the National Association of City Transportation Officials, which is 100 city transportation departments and transit agencies around the country who champion bold, brave, innovative mobility solutions that are people-based. We have members all over CoMotion today, and we're the folks who figure out, how to build the bike networks, how to set the policies for your bike share programs, and how to make sure that the focus is on the communities and not necessarily, the bottom line.
So it's been quite a journey, I would say, over the last, 7 or 8 years. Many of folks in this room, I'm sure, have been part of that journey, and some ups and downs and some leveling out, I think, of some things. And so I want to kind of ask this question in general to the panel here today. Where do you think we've been, and where are we hoping to go, and how does that complement kind of existing systems? Why don't you start out? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I think it's a really exciting time. I think we're kind of back on the way up, and transportation as a whole hasn't really changed too much in 120 years, and then the last 20 years have seen all sorts of new innovations, from on-demand, scooters, micromobility, all these buzzwords that we have today that we didn't have not so long ago. So, I think like anything, you have sort of this S-curve of new technologies where scooters taught us that people don't need their cars, and bikes are a big part of that. And Uber and Lyft taught us that you can request rides on demand, and that's something that users really like. And then, there was a few things that didn't go well or didn't go exactly as planned, and then, oh no, none of this is going to work. And now I think we're kind of in this, second phase of growth where the industry has gotten a lot smarter. We know the pros and cons of a lot of these new technologies. We know what works when, where, and why. And I think those are kind of the hard questions that the industry is thinking about now. And I think that's just going to lead towards, stronger services as we continue to evolve, both as cities, but also, as technology providers.
And thinking about micromobility in particular, it's evolved from being kind of a threat and disruption to, really adoption and acceptance. And I think that couldn't be more clear in the results we've seen across Lyft Urban Solutions globally. 180 million rides across 57 systems, 16 countries. Really seeing that broad adoption. And I think the evidence is also clear in some of the cities and the programs that they've developed or evolved. One example being Portland. They've recently moved to a long-term limited operator scooter program, which has really changed the dynamic from less reactive and trying to prevent problems to more how do we bring this into the kind of broader goals of the city? How do we incorporate it? Deliver equity and accessibility goals. And I think applaud them for kind of making that progression from kind of open to a program that really advances the goals and the work the city is trying to do with its transportation system. Another example, the MTC, the Regional Planning Organization in the Bay Area, invested $16 million into the Bay Wheel system to modernize it, bringing 2,700 new e-bikes.
And new microphones.
2,700 new e-bikes, expanding stations across the city, delivering an electrification pilot where there will be 8+ stations electrified, allowing in-dock charging. So I think that represents the commitment and kind of acceptance of bike and scooter systems as a meaningful part of city transportation systems, and no longer just something to be wrangled, but more so harnessed and used towards those broader goals.
Great. Well, I would encourage everyone to look at NACTO's shared micromobility snapshot. We compile every trip in North America, and what we found is that shared micromobility is back to pre-pandemic levels, which just happened in the last year. And building on what was said, there's really a maturity of the program and sort of a settling in. There's the frantic reaction to, frankly, like the venture capital driven investment and cities being kind of on the back foot and sort of needing to be open-minded to these new things and seeing their potential and their opportunity, but also needing to protect the public interest. And I think our member cities have seen the potential and seen the benefits. They've also had to mitigate a lot of the downsides and navigate the change management with something new in the public rights of way. There's a lot of ownership of the public rights of way. Everybody's kind of gets used to what they see, and I think they've done a great job of kind of reining in the bad actors and then just evolving the programs, going from potentially, multiple permit systems to single operators, to understanding. I think some of the policymakers, elected officials saw, hey, we can charge these guys lots of fees and really make lots of money off of a scooter operation, and charging more fees than they charge automobility. That this should be like a profit center for government, and then of course the companies kind of going bankrupt and consolidating. We do see a lot of challenges, though. I think sustainability from a financial perspective, we're seeing that basically, profitability is possible in the denser, higher income areas, but we as public servants, our public agencies want to see equitable distribution. And so the question of if and what kind of public support belongs to these modes of transportation is the one really confronting cities now. And I think, to achieve our sort of public policy goals, NACTO does call on more public support for micromobility systems and, to achieve, equity and affordability.
Yeah, and having worked in the industry for many years, I think we spent a lot of years kind of dating and flirting with each other, the cities and the vendors, and getting to know each other and determining what we each played in that relationship. And now it's moving into more of a long-term relationship, a marriage, I think a real partnership, and I think that really brings success to the viability of it. So a little bit off of what you said, Ryan, what are some of the other things that your report found, and what are cities looking at now to help build that long-term sustainability and real success of this program? Because I think it's shown that folks are using it. I think there is a place for it. And so how do we kind of marry that, old school versus new school for success in alternative transportation?
Yeah, one of the things is to think about is like in this post-COVID world, we're a little bit less about the commute. And, there was sort of a mindset of this is a last mile solution to get a commuter to a stop to then ride transit to the office. And now we're sort of talking about mobility that takes place kind of throughout the day. Traffic is back up, but transit ridership isn't back up. And I think there's, for micromobility, it's sort of serving as just like an urban transportation option for a wide variety of trip making. And I think like overall our transportation systems are needing to modify to the new reality of kind of all-day transportation behavior. It's less about like, frankly, like a white man in a briefcase in a suburb getting on public transit to go to their downtown. It's a totally different picture. And I think like we need to like evolve the systems and the policies to reflect that.
And I think adding to that, to the idea of how do we get married, I found personally, having worked for the city of Minneapolis previously, overseeing its micromobility programs, procurement is hard, and it still is. We've at Lyft have experienced that very closely, and so I think being able to be more nimble when it comes to procurement, would be helpful, and also just standing up to some of the challenges. It's there's still a lot of turmoil within the industry, and fighting for space, and so. I think that's a key element that we're not quite there yet. I think there's work being done on that aspect, but cities kind of holding firm on procurement processes and being a little more nimble. It would be helpful to getting us to that kind of better place.
So Alex, this question's for you. Ryan's talking about evolving and how things have changed, and Josh talking about being nimble. Tell us a little bit more about microtransit and how that's really filled, I think, a void or some changes in transit. Tell us a little bit about how your piece of the fits in the puzzle.
Yeah, and I think microtransit's also one of these things that we've sort of seen this, curve with, and some of that is, there's no new technology that solves all problems, and I'd argue a lot of microtransit isn't all that micro, and there's some programs that have seen bad headlines for low ridership or high wait times or really expensive cost per rider metrics, because they were trying to do too much and not focused really on what they're good at. And we've tried to stay flexible, and I think cities have started to realize that there's no silver bullet. It's not we need bikes or we need microtransit or we need fixed route or we need on-demand. How do these all work together, and how can they overlap but not be assigned just one specific use case? So thinking about microtransit, when we look at that, we think more about short trips. And we take micro very intentionally because we want to maximize, transportation from a private company's perspective has long been the longer the trip, the more money the company makes. And so if your problem is you have too many short trips in cities and that's what's causing congestion, then you really need to think about it more about how do you don't use the long range model for short trip solutions. And so we've worked closely with a lot of our partners on how do we maximize the number of passengers per car per hour. And a lot of that comes into where the vehicles are routed. Are we using the pooling algorithm, which we should? Is it door to door or is it curb to curb? And so I think these are the types of details that we weren't really talking about in the sort of first wave of microtransit that are now being scrutinized for a good reason. And I think you can use the same solution for short trips to solve commuter issues or a ride to the grocery store or a connection to a distant parking lot. And so we've spent a lot more time with our partners really focusing on what we're good at and not trying to just be this silver bullet that's going to fix all of transportation.
Any thoughts from anyone else on that?
Well, I just want to sort of lean into the partnership aspect of it. Like, I think there was a lot of like new technology, new idea, new software algorithm, and we'll solve it and like come in and have a shuttle that'll be profitable. I think there was frankly a lot of naivete in the private sector coming into sort of microtransit and shuttle operations, and I think also on the public side we can conceive of needs that won't pencil out either. So and sometimes the private sector wants to just get a foot in the door, and we'll sort of like, we'll do that thing that won't make any money, and that'll be a $50 per person trip subsidy, and then you have to decide where you're going to come up with that $50 per person per trip, or you have to break the bad news that the pilot funding has run out. So I think the partnership of like the dialogue before you kind of launch is kind of the key to sort of like get both those perspectives to end up with a well-designed service.
I think that's part of, again, this whole process evolving. I think, it was all one way 4, 5, 6 years ago. Now I think all parties are understanding there needs to be more of a partnership, more of a collaboration for it to be sustainable, for it to, work for the different communities. And different communities are different. I think that's really important. So Josh, tell me about that and how you adapt to work with your different city partners and community partners to make sure that you're meeting the needs of those local areas.
Yeah, I think it's there are underlying themes, but it's different across cities and neighborhoods individually, and so it's kind of a learning process, making sure you're making connections. Part of the work that we do with Lyft Urban Solutions is ensuring we have the right partnerships with trusted voices in the community, so that we're reaching folks that otherwise may not be interested or understand what micromobility might be doing in their neighborhood, or how it could apply, what the use cases they might have, how they can connect to their bike network. All of those things are kind of key elements of the work we do to build trust in the system, and kind of ladder up to the level of policymakers to make sure they understand that we're serving the needs of their constituents. We're making sure that we understand and recognize what key issues might be, and particularly with a focus on station-based micromobility systems, there's the added element of station siting and trying to make sure we're recognized as kind of a key element of that neighborhood or that community, similar to a transit network where you have that reliability and predictability, and kind of feel a connection to that dock-based bike share system that is on your corner, on your block. So that's a lot of the work that we do in kind of building that trust, and making sure that from the neighborhood level to council office to the mayor's office to DOTs, they all understand that we're working together towards the same goals, and trying to make sure that bike share is seen as an option for all, and not just some or most privileged, or limiting in that way.
So I think a lot of folks are very familiar with the bike share programs. They are around many, many different cities, but not so many in the microtransit, Alex. So tell us a little bit about what are those ideal communities, what are the gaps that you're filling, and how you're meeting with the cities to bring them maybe a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, so microtransit is basically, is still needs to get defined, I think. Because there's a lot of, but there are programs where a 30+ cost per rider maybe isn't that bad if you didn't have to build a train station. But that's not sustainable if you're trying to get people to the train station that's already there that people aren't using. And so I think that's where we have to think about these programs all really differently. I think on one hand you have, at Circuit we're more focused on downtown areas. Community mobility is a lot of what we do, and within that's connections to parking, that's connections to transit hubs, that's sometimes dedicated solutions for employment centers or for apartment buildings. But the common theme is fully electric, shared, on demand, and with a focus on short range. But even within that, are we expanding access to an existing transit hub? Are we helping with a parking solution? Are we helping with as an amenity for a hotel? And what's interesting is across all those groups, you sort of have a common goal of, we want to reduce the number of cars on the road. We want to see high ridership. We want to reduce emissions. We want to introduce electric vehicles. We want to see more EV chargers. And so you have common goals across the public and the private. And I think it's just when we think about microtransit, it's all about kind of, what do you mean by microtransit? And are you trying to solve an access issue in a 50 square mile area, or are you trying to drive people to a transit hub within a 4 square mile area? And I think those are really different things. And I think, fortunately, a lot of the cities that we're working with are realizing that now, and realizing that it's not just a buzzword that will solve everything, and it's not either good or bad. It depends on the details of the use case.
So, Ryan, a question I have for you is, what are you hearing from your members? Obviously there's been lots of change in the industry, but what are they looking towards in the future? What solutions are they hoping for? What priorities do they have, so that as companies like these are trying to work with cities, we're meeting them at the right place?
So for microtransit or for micromobility? Which micro?
Both. How about both?
Yeah. Well, talking a bit, I want to talk a little bit about kind of what the public sector kind of needs to do and to sort of meet the private sector a little bit. We've got to get a little better on our policy making. One thing we called out in our micromobility report is like the tax structure. We're still sort of treating this as like a private entity. If we have sales taxes, we're charging sales taxes to people doing a last mile solution on bike share, but we would never charge sales tax to ride the bus. And just for people old enough to remember when there was excitement around free-floating car share and like car sharing. One of the things that killed car sharing was technically a car rental, and one of the things tax policymakers love to do is to tax foreigners living abroad. It's a Monty Python joke, but it's really the highest taxes are hotel taxes and car rental taxes because they're not your voters. Right. They're out-of-towners. So 20% car rental tax is very common. And that's what car share had to do, even though it was for residents. And how could that possibly compete with an Uber or Lyft? So just because there was a driver behind the wheel and you weren't driving your own car, we killed car sharing in favor of Uber or Lyft. So like we have sales taxes here that we probably should be looking at. On the other side of things, I think it's worth mentioning, we've got a change in federal administration, and NACDO is in the conversation at the federal level and policy level, and we're here with a mix of public sector people and private sector people. And I was talking a bit yesterday at the OMF summit. I request to the private sector people, especially tech people who could be seen as in favor. This is not time to spike the football or exact your leverage over the public sector and local government. Really, it's time. The partnership will serve you well in the long term to continue to talk to cities and not box them out and get a preemptive regulation at the state level that makes you work in a city in an unaccountable way. And that's one of the concerns we have with the autonomous vehicle industry. And so like being here with private sector operators who've done a partnership model, I'd really like to lift that up and call on anybody listening to keep doing it that way.
Ryan, you spoke to my heart talking about free-floating car share. I was formerly the GM of Cartago in Minneapolis, St. Paul, so
oh, sorry.
I feel that very personally.
I some trauma there.
Yeah, fought against rental car taxes during my time there. But speaking to your point, I think we recognize the need for long-term, deep investments to make station-based bike share work, and that is predicated on good partnerships with our public agency partners, and that's not just directly like a city that we're working with, but maybe a regional MPO who is a funding partner, or state or federal authorities. And so I think being able to come to terms with that and be on common ground with our city partners, that like this works best when there's deep, meaningful investment, infrastructure that is very reliable, predictable, and recognized as part of the community, and can be sustainable long term. That's got to take that partnership element and acknowledge that there's shared investment that is key to making that work.
Well, not to get controversial, but why not? It's late in the day. No, just a general. There's I think cities and private sector who've done it very well. Some not so well. We're growing, learning, evolving. Open to the panel. Any examples you can give of maybe a program that started off not great and then grew into something better, we've learned along the way, or just, any roses, any great stories? Just love to hear about what you guys think have worked well and things to continue to work on moving forward. I'll open it up to anybody.
I want to do a compare and contrast, okay. Sort of controversial because I've lived on both coasts. One of the policy issues of the question for micromobility, bike share is public ownership and public subsidy versus it's got to pay for itself and let the private sector figure it out. And so in New York, City Bike, where you have tremendous density, and it's been a little bit more let the private sector kind of like innovate, market. You've seen e-bikes introduced and them be incredibly popular and incredibly high trips per bike per day and usage. But the cost, like they're very expensive bikes, and charging and battery maintenance, et cetera. The cost to the user is very high, so the public policy goals of equity, of affordability are not necessarily being met. Here, LA Metro is like, hey, it's great let's see bike share as public transit, and we have public transit operators around the country who operate bike share. But the bike share that LA Metro is operating still is primarily non-e-bikes. is more affordable. But I was in town yesterday and wanted to go to Silver Lake from downtown, and took a very inexpensive bike out and started to go towards Silver Lake up a hill on a bike that was 45 pounds. And I'm
Sweat
like,
a lot.
I'm a fit, able-bodied person, and I had to get off and walk the bike. And I was like, this is not transportation. It's just symbolic. It's not actual transportation. So how can we get that public interest with the quality product? And we've got to find that line to get to.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the Bay Area example where MTC recognized the opportunity to modernize the system and take it to kind of a different place, bringing 2,700 e-bikes across the 5 cities, including the East Bay for the first time in the Bay Wheel system. We've seen fantastic results with that. I think we're up 30% plus year over year in terms of overall ridership and really strong adoption. It's funny, Berkeley, Oakland, Emeryville make up the 3 East Bay cities that have e-bikes, and Berkeley, because of their kind of political process, lag behind the others in terms of deploying the e-bikes. And just the crossover, they had more trips because of the crossover between the cities than the other 2 did. So it's clear people wanted it. And with the partnership of MTC, we were able to deliver that. Speaking to the city bike example, and one thing we're excited about in the Bay Area, but also more broadly, being able to find that partnership. And this is not only our city agency partners, but also utility coordination to deliver electrification at scale is going to be a key to making sure that the operational costs of running e-bikes aren't so overwhelming, and we can actually make it feasible and sustainable long term, where we're not driving around in vans swapping batteries, but bikes are charging in dock. We found that 10 to 15% of stations electrified can actually offset 70 to 90% of the battery swapping needs in a given system. And so that's kind of the future that we see, and the opportunity for being able to make sure e-bikes have a sustainable future in bike share systems that we operate. And we're seeing some good results, some good partnership coming from ComEd in Chicago, ConEd in New York, where they're willing to cover some or all of the make-ready costs, which are prohibitively expensive to getting power to stations. And being innovative in places like DC, where we have 4 solar-powered charging stations, so like a solar canopy, which actually facilitates charging of the bikes. So being able to deliver on those kinds of solutions is kind of the future, where we see bike share going, and how to make it sustainable long term, and continue to reach those goals of affordability, accessibility, equity. Sorry.
Alex, let's turn to you a second. And again, as you we're talking about adapting and evolving. I think, again, as you started, it was one idea of what you had in mind. And as you're meeting with different cities, municipalities, you mentioned hotels, lots of different campuses that you're working with. What are some of those problems that you're helping solve? What does the conversation start like? And again, what's that gap that you're filling?
Yeah, I think, we kind of think about 4 different use cases. One are, more property amenities. That's hotels, apartment complexes, multi-use developments, event centers, things like that. And that's, there's always going to be a need for that. People don't have their car, or don't want to use their car, and that's helpful. And then we look at first last mile connections to transit hubs, and that's not just train stations. We have a great first last mile program in Dallas that goes to a bus stop, so you can do first last mile to fixed route buses as well. Community mobility is probably our biggest category, and that sounds really broad because it kind of is. That's usually when we're talking with cities that have congestion issues, parking issues. There's an incentive for economic development, getting people out and about, shopping, dining. Changes to parking codes is where the solution can be useful. And then we've seen a lot of equity and access issues, which is kind of first last mile, but if people live outside of downtown, then how can we provide a cost-effective way to get people in and out of downtown? And there's always been this dilemma when you think about the cost of living and the cost of transportation. It's kind of one or the other, and I think we've seen a lot of programs there meaning that the less you spend on housing, the further away you are, the more you have to spend on transportation. So that's been a challenge, especially in LMI and disadvantaged communities. And so we've seen sort of a lot of access initiatives. But again, all of these under this sort of, how do we move people effectively within 5 square miles? And there's a lot of trips within 5 square miles. And I think that's where some of the best programs we've had are with partners that realize that there's different benefits here. It's not just a single source of value that comes out of the program. This helps with parking and it gets people to the train. And I think also the partners that use the data. Everyone talks about data, collecting data, standardizing data, but use it, and tweak things so that you have comparisons to make. And I think when we've had really successful programs, it's been partners saying, it's free, what if we charged $1? Well, we actually move more people when we charge $1 in that example. So, using the data and making changes so that you can actually have better data to measure against has typically led to the most efficient programs that we have.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, if I could, I just want to build on something you touched on and love to always take the opportunity to connect this back to land use and the built form of the city. And you mentioned parking and avoiding the need for parking. Like, we're NACTO, the T stands for transportation. This is a transportation conference, but we have really no purpose other than to serve the city and the residents and people. And, transportation was not a top 10 issue in our recent national election, but affordable housing and costs were. And I think we're doing this work so that we can provide the housing and the opportunity for people. And the way we're going to dig ourselves out of that is with density. And, your service supporting the Bright Line is, it's a transportation, but it's a transit-oriented development project. It's a major densification, urbanization project. And we want to position these services, everyone might not come on a bike share, but when you have those options, it's easier to argue that we don't need that parking garage or we don't need those parking requirements to go with the new development, or to take away those parking requirements so that the development can actually happen, so that we can have affordable development that's done. So I think more and more, sometimes we forget to position our transportation work. Our annual conference is not called the Transportation Conference, it's the Designing Cities Conference. And we're doing this to support the city as a whole. And I think we should all be thinking about how we do that. And I think that kind of message will resonate to the powers that be that we'll be working with in the future.
So Alex, you had mentioned free versus maybe charging $1. I know that there's been a lot of changes throughout the last couple of years on the thinking behind that. And I'd love you to tell the audience who might not be that familiar with how that change has happened and, like you said, the benefits, the data as to why that makes sense or not.
Yeah, and this, there's a lot of theory of routine mode choices, why people pick their transportation, but I mean, simplifying, like, how much did this cost? How long does it take? What's that experience like? I mean, those are generally the themes that people are thinking about subconsciously when they're making their transportation. The bike share was cheaper, but it obviously wasn't a great bike, so maybe he would have rather paid a few more dollars for a bike that could have gotten up the hill. So, we've kind of taken that, and we work with our partners on this, and we always encourage them, like, make changes. It's like you wouldn't expect vendors to do this, like, give us more work, but we want to see the services be more successful because then they're going to stay around longer. And so we had a lot of our services are free, and one of the challenges with free services is you can start to become, the victim of your own success, and then ridership gets too high, wait times go up, and you end up having a bad experience. And we had one program where we went from free to $1, and then the next month we moved more passengers. There was a small decline in demand, but there was a bigger decline in cancellations, which actually led to moving more people the following month. And then there does reach a tipping point, but I think those are the types of tweaks where you can still have a subsidized transportation system, but you can use fares not just to make money, but also to help dictate behavior. Or maybe it's not a binary question, maybe it's $2, but if you get dropped off at the train station, then it's free. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities to kind of be flexible with fare pricing so that you can actually create more efficient systems and provide a better service for the riders.
So Ryan, you talked about the study that you guys did and a lot of the research, and was there any surprising information that you learned or anything that you thought, well, we hadn't really thought of it that way?
Well, one of the points that we sort of make that I haven't been able to make is that cities need to continue to build the bike network and the safe network for micromobility to move along. And I think we're seeing, while we're excited to be back to the pre-pandemic or above the pre-pandemic record of trips, the lack of safe infrastructure is a barrier. I think we've heard it from our operators. I think there was some creative thought in the beginning that maybe the operators with all their venture capital money could like help us build our bike networks and sort of things. That hasn't necessarily panned out. Or your email list could help us overcome the NIMBYism of the bike network development. So we really need to continue to support our cities to build out the safe infrastructure. There's some federal programs that we hope will continue in the transition at the federal level, that we could use more voices to say that Safe Streets and Roads for All, RAISE, Reconnect, that these are programs that cities are benefiting from and has a trickle-down effect to the private sector operators. And we have our third edition of our Urban Bikeway Design Guide coming out, available for pre-order.
Nice plug, nice plug.
Coming out from Island Press in January. Google NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide, third edition, which we really think will elevate the game of bike network development. You know, our first design guide gave cities the permission slip to build the protected infrastructure that you've seen happen in the U.S. that our scooter riders, our bike share riders really need. Because what we want to do is get them hooked. And this, like, to walk up to a kiosk or a vehicle and just be able to scan your QR code and give it a shot, like, if they need to have that good first trip and feel safe. And we're talking about like novice users who could really be hurt on our streets if we don't have the right street designs.
Amen.
Yeah, and I think just to piggyback on that, I
Yes.
mentioned this earlier, but that's a barrier that we found in particularly like equity focus, priority, opportunity areas, whatever the term is for your city. People not being aware of the bike network, how to get where they want to go, and also not having connectivity, in those areas, and has been kind of growing, but still not quite there, and that's something that we want to make sure we're working on to help educate folks, to connect them, as I mentioned, making sure we're using trusted voices, those community partners who are well connected and able to, have that good conversation with folks about how they can consider bike share, a meaningful option. And when we can kind of layer that where bike share is connected to, a good bike network and complement a transit network, those three things come together and really is what makes us successful and helps us gain that, reliability that I think Dockless doesn't totally have, certainly, the work that Dockless Bikes and Scooters, are trying to do is along those lines, but I think there's something to be said for that physical element co-located with a bike lane and, connecting to transit and also filling in gaps where transit doesn't exist.
So I think building that network and that infrastructure is so important, and I know that many of the companies have tons and tons of data about where their riders ride and can compare that and layer that where there's infrastructure. So Josh, can you talk about how your data might help cities understand where that infrastructure is missing? I mean, I think they have a pretty good idea, but backing up with the data that you have, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, a good anecdote is Denver, where we operate bikes and scooters, and they used Ride Reports, which is a data aggregator. They take data via MDS and GBFS APIs, essentially turn that into something useful, a public-facing open data portal, but also city-facing kind of internal insights. And they use that to inform a quick build project, which we supported downtown Denver. Market and Blake actually opened shortly before the Designing Cities conference last year there. And so, it's directly informing their build out of the bike network. And I think, where we have the opportunity to continue to do that, provide, those types of insights, that's a win-win for everybody. And it's been an evolution of acceptance of data standards as well, kind of as, the industry overall has evolved. It has not always been a smooth ride with MDS, but I think we've gotten there. There's generally broad acceptance as, this is a valuable, meaningful tool, and, the way that cities can most easily ingest that data, turn it into something useful, and, gain insights, and also communicate, be transparent, about the growth and, results that programs are seeing.
Yeah, now just to build on that, the ability to storytell to convince people that, you know, what the city is up to makes sense. One of the first sort of pre-big data things, to date myself, was Mayor Michael Bloomberg put GPS, controversially, in all the yellow taxi cabs in New York City. So we had trip origins and trip destinations. And when City Bike first launched, we put out a report on trips in Midtown and about how long they took in a yellow taxi and how short they were and what the price was, and compared that to City Bike trips. And, you know, it was, you had to put that, use this two very big data sets to tell like a very simple story that like people are paying a lot more and they're stuck in congestion to go very short distances, and there is this other alternative that was relatively new. So we want to be able to tell those stories to justify the initiatives that we're taking.
Yeah, I think that's very important, that storytelling, that community building, and bringing those examples to life. So we've got a couple more minutes. I do want to ask our panel members, share a story. Tell a story now on why what you're doing is helping the greater benefit, whether it be a community, solving a problem. You know, why should you continue to do what you're doing? Very easy question.
I'll shoot from the hip. I mean, I think it's easy to get behind what we're doing. We provide on-demand shared electric shuttle services in downtown areas driven by employee drivers using electric vehicles. So, you know, the value of transportation is obvious to a lot of people here. It's not always obvious to the rest of people that aren't here. And so I think, you know, we think about job creation, economic activity, emissions reduction. And I think along the lines of emissions reduction, transportation globally, largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Light and medium vehicles, medium-duty vehicles, largest part of the transportation category when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions. Cities make up 2/3 of the world's emissions. So if we can reduce emissions caused by passenger vehicles in cities, I think we're making an impact that resonates beyond just the community.
That was great.
Yeah, and I think everybody would agree getting more people on bikes is a good thing, and you know we're all in favor of that. And so, you know, Lyft's mission to really be the solution that cities need in that way, being able to bring down barriers and introduce more people to biking, including by, you know, incorporating scooters in some of the systems we operate, which are integrated. They have, you know, like a membership which encompasses both bikes and scooters at a lower rate, kind of reciprocal benefits. We found that, you know, like in the Divvy system in Chicago, introducing scooters brought 20% more new people to the system, raised growth, the trip, overall trips by like 25%. And so, you know, it did that without kind of cannibalizing bike trips. People who rode bikes stayed on those bikes. It just brought more people, introduced them to the system. We're seeing similar early results in Portland. We just launched scooters there a few months ago. So I think being able to kind of grow that overall pie, expose more people to biking, and as we know, you see more people biking, you know, it's there's kind of a virtuous circle there where, you know, it's going to get more people interested in biking. There's also safety in numbers where, you know, it enhances the overall safety of biking in communities by having just more people riding bikes. So that's, you know, what's personally exciting for me, being able to work for Lyft on the bike share side of the business, is to tell my kids, I'm getting more people on bikes. And, you know, it's truly something that I think everyone can agree on. There's, you know, differences in how we think it should be done and contract structures and, you know, things like that. But ultimately, the bottom line is we all want more people on bikes. That's a good thing for all our cities. E-bikes in particular, being able to, you know, really raise the bar in terms of ridership and where our systems go from here, I think, you know, is common ground for all of us.
Cool. Anything you want to mention?
Yeah. For me, one thing we haven't gotten to, your Google assignments continue. Google the Better Bike Share Partnership. NACTO is a key member of the Better Bike Share Partnership, and one of the things that we're working on is that historically urban neighborhoods, communities of color, can often not feel like, is this new thing that's happening for me,
Yeah.
and how am I included in that? And the Better Bike Share Partnership is working to address that. We have a program called the Transportation Justice Fellowship with early career professionals who are primarily people of color, either at bike share, scooter companies, or at city agencies in those where we give them coaching and training and create a cohort of support so that we can have those voices and have cultural competency. We can develop policies and champion policies to make it affordable and equitable in how those services go, and that hopefully, in the future, the next time you're doing a panel, you won't have 3 white guys up here.
Amen. All right, we'll be wrapping up here in just a few minutes, and get ready with any of your questions there in the audience. But I do want to go back to electrification a moment, because I think it's a very important component on making sure that we can continue this moving forward. So Josh, you had mentioned some of the partnerships you're working on. Tell us a little bit more about that conversation, and what are the important elements to success in electrification as this continues to grow?
Yeah, we've seen e-bikes really leading the growth in our system. Capital Bike Share, for example, 169% growth in e-bike trips from 22 to 23. City Bike, 50%. So, it's really a significant piece of what our future is for bike share. And I think we've been doing the work to try and build precedent for, that as a critical component, electrification, station electrification, where, docks are charging bikes, and we, can bring down the operational costs of the system. We can reduce our operational footprint, therefore, reduce VMT and greenhouse gas emissions associated with our operations. So there's some momentum being built, especially with utility partners, which, are particularly challenging to get that recognition and kind of the regulatory hurdles to say a rate tariff, which helps bring the cost down of the trenching work to get power to a station, or the permitting process, which may touch multiple departments in a city and the utility. So we're making progress there, and we hope that setting some precedent with 30 plus stations across Chicago, New York, DC by the end of the year, and many more to come next year, will only help us and other cities beyond where Lyft operates. I think there's some really good examples globally, like Madrid is a fully electric system, which in Barcelona, which I think have seen really strong results and will continue to. So being able to bring those learnings back here, it's a much different landscape there. The cost to bring power to a station is much less. So I think just being able to build on that precedent and continue to find opportunities, looking at UDEBs for federal funding to support electrification going forward. Kudos to you for all the good work you've done in the last couple of years. But yeah, I think that's where we see this going from here.
Alex, you have an electric fleet.
Yeah. Anybody that says they're an expert on electric vehicle charging is lying, is the advice I'll give. No, I think we're a turnkey operator. So we work with city partners and developers, and we provide the parking, the charging, the vehicles, insurance, maintenance management, driver app, rider app, tech, and we try to put all that into a package and make things easy for our partners. And one of the things that we've learned is that we have to set up charging for ourselves, mainly, to run the services, and there are opportunities to make those public. But, we've had to work with parking departments and transportation departments and property managers and utility companies and electricians. And I think in order for us to see a more rapid progress in, EV adoption, I think people need to work together, because there isn't any single source expert or any single source champion that's going to make it all come to life. And I listed all these great things that we do, but we have electricians we work with in all these markets that we call and ask questions, and cities ask us questions about charging, and we work with organizations. So I think it's really important when we think about public-private partnership to get more Ps involved, because public groups need to talk to each other, private groups need to be working together. At the end of the day, having more chargers and more EVs on the road is going to benefit everyone, from a property manager to a resident in a city. And I think it's just really important that the publics and publics are working together, just like the privates and privates are working together when they can.
Ryan, any thoughts?
Electricity is not what our transportation departments do, but we got to learn how to figure it out too. But I remember, don't want to have to call Con Ed. You don't want to have to call your utility. It's like a whole new level of the game that it's really got to figure this out.
Right. Very good. All right, so we are going to wrap it up here in just a few minutes. Again, get those questions ready, but I do want to just ask our folks, Any final thoughts about what the future is going to look like, what you hope to maybe barriers to break down to make this more accessible over the next months and years?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in. Lyft is leaning into dock-based electrified micromobility as what we see the future, how we can be successful and continue to be that sustainable, reliable transportation option that, is filling gaps, helping to, when we can kind of mimic a transit network, have that, as I mentioned earlier, that, element of I know where my station is. I recognize like my partner brand. I have some element of loyalty to it, and then kind of building travel behavior on that. That's where I think we see the future opportunity, and then continuing to grow. Regional programs is something that we've also struggled with, but are coming to I think a better place with in the Boston region. There's 13 municipalities that participate in the bike share system. DC, there's a similar number. We have 5 in the Bay Area. There are different contexts among each of those. Some, very little utilization, but still key, to maintain in those cities. And there's work to be done to make sure that there's operational funding to continue to support those systems and continue to build out, because it's not just bike share, micromobility for the largest cities who have the highest demand. There needs to be that recognition and opportunity kind of trickling down to whether it's adjacent municipalities or smaller, medium-sized cities, and the funding and like political support to kind of build those kind of long-term systems.
Yeah.
If I could,
Please.
I'd sort of add an aspiration. I think that the possibility of fully electrified bike share, we're seeing it. It's tremendous, but there's economies of scale in the private sector of having everything be the same. And what we know is we need a more inclusive system to be more accepting of. It's not just there's been a robust conversation on what accessibility means in this context, but just even like the need to carry things and children. Like there's people who don't travel alone. Like City Bike. It's great numbers, but New York is a big city filled with lots of single people who City Bike, bike share just works to get a single person from their office to their happy hour or whatever their need is to their gym. Yeah. But, what does it do? I went through the transition to a parent with small kids. So can we have, cargo bikes, family bikes that grow into the system? How can we make it so we can truly say, because we do get blowback from our cities that this is not for me, and all the different me's that are out there. Like, how do we make it applicable to more me's?
That's a great point.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is I think it's a really exciting time. I think wherever cities are growing, traffic and parking is getting worse. So getting ahead of this is just so important, whether it's a shared electric shuttle, a bike, a scooter, getting people out of the cars is something that is going to have to happen in all of our cities. And I think, so try a program out and then tweak it and play with it, because we spend so much time planning things and then so little time assessing and adjusting things after they're already there. And I think that's really when we can learn and get real feedback and use real data to make these systems great, so that we don't have a on-demand's good, on-demand's bad conversation. We have a when, where, why, what, and how. And I think the more we have and the more we tweak, the more we learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's going back to having the relationship and the conversation. All right, so we will open it up to our panelists. We've got, in the back, we've got a question right here in the back. Thank you.
Okay, now can you hear me? So I have a follow-up question for Ryan, but I think that Josh and Alex, you can also speak to this. I am biased and think about cargo bike mobility. I'm in the TDM space. I used to work in the TMA world. Actually, my old boss, Tom, is here from the Longwood medical community. And I recently moved on to that to start the first in the nation electric cargo bike share. So,
woohoo!
Nice.
Round of applause for that.
Woo, we love it.
So I'm curious because working with commuters in the TMA space, they're constantly coming to me and saying, I don't bike because this, because it's one thing to get you on a bike by yourself. It's another thing to say, oh, put your kid on that. And so what is the work that NACTO is doing to steer the cities to be able to have those conversations effectively? Because really, I can stay in my lane, I know the cargo bike policy, I know the mobility policy, but I need the city that has the power to build that high comfort corridor of connected networks to be able to actually do that, and which that will enable is all the other land use, public space planning, the conversion of last mile mobility, because I'm focused on the consumer mobility, but will enable all these other things that we're talking about together. So,
You're talking, I think I'm hearing that you're saying, how can we get the cities to build the infrastructure?
yeah, so like I'm curious how, because it really comes down to what's the story that you're telling. So like, because there's urgency around climate, land use, and just cities operating efficiently. So has your narrative shifted to be able to drive that so they can go home and they can make those cases?
Yeah, I love that question. So that my favorite answer to what narrative should we choose is pick your strongest opponent and have your narrative targeted to them. So if your opponent who doesn't want to see a bike lane network doesn't really care about the climate, your answer shouldn't be about the climate. If your opponent is concerned about parking and traffic impacts of your bike lane network, your answer should address the parking and traffic implications. And the answer generally is, if we have a balanced multimodal mobility system, in general, those who do have to drive and park will have a more pleasant time doing so.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think an underappreciated aspect, although it's been studied a lot, is the impact of bike lanes and bike share on businesses. And I don't think that narrative hasn't been developed enough to truly resonate to address the parking blowback that so often happens, or is so challenging when it comes to building new infrastructure or putting in bike share stations. So I think being able to speak to that more, that this new bike share station or this bike lane is going to bring more people to your business, and being able to kind of refresh the studies, because some of them are actually a bit stale, but being able to refresh that, I think is an important piece to continuing to help change the narrative and fight that battle against you're taking away parking and it's going to be bad for my business. That just seems to be, it's such an emotional issue for people, and it's unfortunate in that way, but being able to come back with data to support that, the counter narrative, I think, is really important too.
Great. Any other questions? Up here, just a minute. In the orange, second row, here we go.
Hi. Following up on whether to build bike lanes, I have a question about where to build them. So cities don't have great data on bicycle crashes, because unless the bicyclist went to the hospital, generally it's not a reported crash in most cities. I'm curious if you or other micromobility operators, you probably have better data than cities do based on, I don't know what kind of sensors are in the devices, but accelerometers, close calls, hard brakes. Are cities interested in that data? Are they interested in whatever sensor suite you might have or could add to figure out where it's dangerous and where they could build bike lanes with the biggest impact?
Yeah, this is something that back during my time a few years ago with the city of Minneapolis and then Spin, another bike and scooter operator, it was being explored within the mobility data specification, like what data could be derived from sensors to be able to inform safety in a better way. And I think the challenge is that data, the sensors that could be reporting that data, it's not entirely reliable to say, this was actually a near miss, or this is a dangerous intersection because we're seeing a common occurrence of whatever it might be, hard braking or acceleration or what have you. It's difficult to parse through like what could be a user's first trip, and therefore maybe a different experience, a bumpier ride, let's say, than what was actually a safety incident. And so I don't know that there's a silver bullet. Cities also have a tough time with being able to look at near misses. Like, it has to be a planner, out there observing. Otherwise, that data isn't collected. And there's also the challenge of crash reporting not being reliable. And also how it's categorized. in some ways, particularly with scooters often being lumped in with like mopeds or motorcycles in some cases. So all that to say, I don't know that we've figured that out yet. We, as the private sector and the public sector, I think there are a lot of challenges to that. That's not to say that we shouldn't work through it. We just don't have that reliable data set to be able to report that. I think mainly it revolves around like where we're seeing use, where we have, a city may have some level of crash reporting and being able to, just continue to beat the drum that, bike lanes are good for everyone. They enhance safety for all users. And it's not necessarily totally based on, this data shows that this is an unsafe intersection. I think cities are getting better, evolving with that. I know Ride Report I mentioned earlier, they have their open data portal, which has kind of overlaid Vision Zero data, like high injury corridor networks with micromobility usage to help kind of, show the commonalities there. So I think, there's some evolution happening, but, it's still not at a place where it can be a totally reliable data set to be used in those decisions.
All right, well, we are out of time, but I'm sure our panelists will be happy to answer questions afterwards. I do appreciate everyone being here today, and thanks for sticking with us this late afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.